Welcome to this presentation on noun frequencies in cohesive nominal groups. Here's an outline of the presentation. I'll start by giving a few examples of lexical cohesion. I'll explain the motivation behind the research. It's a piece of research based on corpus linguistics, so I'll just explain the methodology a little bit in case you're not familiar with that kind of work. The research has generated a word list, the purpose of which is to help in English for academic purposes programs. So I'll show you the list and discuss a limitation of the list, or at least limitations of lists with a general purpose. I did a bit of follow-up work investigating this area of focus on an EAP foundation program to see how they were using lexical cohesion, a certain kind of it anyway. And then look into some pedagogic applications of the word list, like how might we use it with our students. So here's an example of some lexical cohesion. This is a paragraph about Brexit. Lexical cohesion appears many places in this paragraph, which was written just after the UK voted to leave the EU. Haven't listed all the examples of lexical cohesion. I just wanted to draw your attention to two slightly different types. Looking at A, which is the two pieces of language highlighted in light blue, you can see that the first idea that the UK voted to leave the European Union last week is summarised by the subject of the next sentence, this decision. This decision refers back to the whole sentence actually. Contrasting that with the cohesion listed in B and C, where you've got synonyms for single words where consequences in one sentence becomes effects in the next sentence, suffer in one sentence becomes hardships in the next sentence. Just to be clear, in this paper we're going to be focusing on the type of lexical cohesion that occurs in A, where a whole idea is really summarised into fewer words. Okay, so thinking about the motivation for the project here, I did my master's in South Africa. It was a project into cohesion in isiZulu speakers' use of academic English. It was a small corpus of papers really, 23 only. So I counted things like how many times I used the word this and whether they used it with any ambiguity or not. Could you tell what was being referred to? There were 31 cases across the 23 papers, which was quite a low figure actually, and 7 of them were ambiguous. You couldn't really tell what was being referred to. Here's an example from one of the papers. Technology must be questionable to all of us in terms of usage. It must not be exposed to learners too much. They should learn to answer on their own. This could lead them in problems not to think on their own. So you'd normally be thinking, well, this probably refers to the most recent idea, but actually it makes more sense if it refers to the first sentence when there's possible overusage of technology. So here, this could perhaps be better summarised by a phrase like this type of exposure to technology, or such a dependency on technology, could then lead to problems with students not thinking on their own. Also in the master's project, I investigated instances of this plus noun, so determiner plus referential noun, or noun used for lexical cohesion, and there were very few of those actually, especially abstract type nouns. There were often repetitions like this device, and device had been in the previous sentence. But anyway, this is an example where a quotation's been summarised cohesively by the phrase "this statement," and it was successful. I noticed there were no ambiguous cases of this plus noun with referential use in the small corpus. So it led to me thinking that students of academic English can benefit from working on nominal groups, especially with a cohesive focus, They can improve the accuracy of their references. This particular group of students in South Africa, they needed more abstract nouns, and they didn't have any complexity, no variation. There are no adjectives in there, no more complex noun phrases really. Referring to nominal groups in particular, Halliday, Matheson and Matheson describe them as the primary resource used in grammar for packing in lexical items at high density. So that's the place in the sentence where you can get a lot of information in. Fang et al. Explain that nominalization enables something that has been presented in a series of clauses to be distilled into one nominal element. Such distillation enables a chain of reasoning to be developed by the writer. And these types of cohesive nominal groups allow that, where the theme becomes the rime becomes a theme of the next sentence, and so on. That can recycle different elements of the sentence economically in terms of language, with abstract nouns, nominalizations, in fact. So I was aware of Coxhead's extremely useful academic word lists. Been very useful for many students and teachers and researchers. So I thought a frequency-based list of these types of abstract nouns used referentially in nominal groups could be useful. Tom Cobb, in fact, said, learners like word lists, so let's give them good ones, and this is anyway an attempt at that. Other word lists of note, and there are many others. Martinez and Schmidt, phrasal expressions list. Lexical bundles by Bird and Coxhead, and larger word lists like the New General Service list and Paul Nation's BNC COCA lists, all useful in research. So here's some examples of some cohesive nominal groups. For the purpose of this project, I define cohesive nominal groups as a noun phrase with at least a determiner and a noun, which are being used to refer back to an earlier point in the text. You can't decode it without remembering, calling to mind something that you've recently read to which it refers. So the underlined phrases here are examples of the kinds of things I was going to look for in this project. This method, this new method, these methods, these matrix methods, such unconventional methods, such a method, such a circular method. So 3 different determiners, slightly different types of syntax, including adjectives and articles and so on. But you can see that there's hopefully something in common with them. They're all referring backwards and similar types of syntax. These 8 variations were the 8 that I was going to investigate the corpus for. So these were the research questions I looked at. So which nouns are most frequently used in these types of nominal group to achieve lexical cohesion, lexical density in published academic work across the social sciences and humanities fields? The point here was that, for me anyway, in the academic language teaching I've been doing, and seemed to me to be the case in other centres, that there was a distinction between sort of hard sciences and sort of everything else in terms of language preparation, with some more specific stuff happening in modules, but a lot of the EAP provision was sort of divided like that. So I thought, well, if that's the case, then we need a word list broad enough to use in those types of domains. And then there were some other sort of sub-questions really. Which of the 8 syntactic structures are most common? These nouns, are they more frequent or less frequent? Using the classic distinction between general service list and academic word list. How could we use this list in EAP input, which I've done a bit of work on. This is the Corpora. It's actually, I originally found it on LexTutor, which is a very useful website. Tom Cobb told me that it's called the General Academic Corpus on this website. Tom Cobb told me that it's actually a corpus that Paul Nation prepared. Tom Cobb gave me the original files, which I divided and tagged and everything. Um, there's a humanities part and a social sciences part. There were more words in humanities than social sciences, and I think next time I'd probably try and have a corpus with of the same number of running words. Here you have a breakdown of the different subjects represented here, and history dominates a bit in the humanities side, sociology dominates a bit in the social sciences side, and again I think designing my own corpus from scratch, I would want to iron those sorts of things out. This is my first research in this area, really. So I've got roughly just under 6 million words. What am I going to do with them? I use a piece of software called Antconc, which is freely available from Lawrence Anthony's website. So I'm basically searching, putting in a search term that allows me to search for every time this plus noun appears in these 3 million words or those 2.5 million words. Give me a list of them. Then I can extract the data, that would be the blue data in the box there, copy that, and then I stripped away the determiners, and then I just added up basically with a frequency count how many times these words had appeared for all of the 8 structures, and then combine the singular and plural forms. I'm not working with word families, but because they're all nouns. I then added them to a table in Excel, which gave me frequency counts. I also did a count of the range, how many texts they'd appeared in. So range and frequency, which was the sort of typical means of analysing things. And then I was trying to make a list, and my guiding criteria here was it should be a general purpose list used in EAP programs for humanities and social sciences. So we want frequent words, we want a manageable list. So when I was looking at words per million and that kind of thing, I was sort of thinking we don't want 500 of these. We want something that could conceivably be used in a lesson or a few lessons. So I was thinking round about a list of about 70 or so items. And that guided to an extent these figures. So a word is included in the list if it appears 70 times in the combined corpora in any of the 8 structures. Should appear with a frequency of at least 10 times per million words in each section of the corpus, and appear in at least 20% of the text in each corpus. So if it failed on any of those, it was excluded. A little bit of evidence that the words used are less frequent, more academic words. However, it's a combined list with corpora made from humanities texts and social sciences texts, and as much as I'd like it to be, a robust list which will work in any circumstance, I wasn't sure, and in fact the academic word list has been criticised in different ways, although it's an excellent piece of research. So what I looked at was basically if I say, well, which of the criteria that I mentioned, like 10, a frequency of 10 per million words, a range of 20% in each corpus, 70 overall in the combined corpora. If it doesn't meet one of those, if it doesn't meet those criteria, if the word doesn't meet those criteria on both sides of the corpus, just one, which words? In other words, if I'd done a specifically social sciences corpus, which words would be in? If I'd done a specific humanities corpus, which words would be in? I think you can see that in the social sciences particularly, there's a lot of words here. This research, this analysis, this finding, this data, this result, they're really very frequent and very important. Certainly the kind of work we do, that might be a kind of slight bias of mine. The humanities were much more related to texts, especially literature, passage, connection, text poem, and that obviously reflects the composition of the corpus to an extent as well. One of the sub-questions, research questions, was which of the syntactic structures, the 8 structures, is most frequent. And these 8 are in order now, and you can see there's a massive prominence of this plus noun structures in the findings. I was very conscious that there were not all determiners were here, especially that and those. And the reason I didn't include that and those was because the tagging software I used was not tagging that as a determiner very accurately. As you know, it can be a conjunction. You know, I believe that this project is valid, so that as a conjunction was that research was not thoroughly peer reviewed. It's a determiner, but the tagging software wasn't picking that up properly. And then I decided that and those were a pair and didn't include them. But I did some other research on the corpus of manual count, counted quite a lot of words, and if those plus noun were included, it would be between 4 and 5 on the list, and that plus noun would be between 5 and 6 on that list. So they're probably, according to what our intuition would have said, they are a little bit lower. There were over 36,000 of these types of structures in the whole corpus, which seems to be a significant piece of syntax, really. Okay, so there's a list here. I followed up recently in preparation for this talk by just thinking about what kind of student might benefit from this list. I mean, I'm saying now we've got this list, we could possibly use it in class. What kind of students? I mean, certainly the isiZulu students in South Africa, whose writing kind of inspired the idea, but very different educational backgrounds, different levels of privilege and so on. Our students at the King's on the IELTS, who come in with a score of IELTS 5.5 writing and IELTS 7 when they come in, are very different types of linguistic development to those isiZulu speakers. So I did an investigation on how frequently they were using these types of syntactic structure, cohesive nominal groups, and what kind of vocabulary were they using. So I had 30 essays, 15 from IELTS 5.5 people, that's their score in writing, 15 essays from IELTS 7 people, and I had 30 essays from 2 native speaker Corpora. It's not a massive sample size, but it's really just a starting point. So I'm basically comparing the number of these syntactic forms that appear in native speaker essays versus non-native speakers on a foundation program to see basically like, well, how far away are they in terms of the numbers? You can see along the top the lower King students are first, and then the higher King students, and then the two groups of native speakers, and then the different syntactic structures down the left, 8 of those. This plus noun is by far the most frequent structure used again, and as you might expect, there's quite a low number of adjectives being used in the first structure. There's slightly more for these, but again, the native speakers are using adjectives a lot more, which I think suggests that that's something that could be focused on in class potentially. The actual numbers, so 45 in total of these from the 15 IELTS 5.5 students, 91 from the IELTS 7 students, the 15 essays from the Michigan native speaker corpus, they had 112, so that's quite a lot higher even than the higher IELTS group. The Barway people only had 83. To give a rule of thumb, I've averaged it at 97.5, and the IELTS students are 17, so a little bit below that, but you can see they're not a million miles away. What I get from this is that the IELTS 5.5 students need a bit more encouragement, along with lots of other sort of work on grammar and so on. Both groups need a bit more encouragement with using adjectives in their structures. The other thing was just had a quick look at vocabulary, so what kind of words are following, and there's a bit of evidence that the higher IELTS group need to introduce more academic and technical vocabulary into their cohesive structures. The higher level group use 22 unique word forms, so word types in these structures, which were not among the most common 2,000 words in the language. Whereas the Michigan corpus used 28 types. So a significant difference, and the Barway, which I haven't put here, they use 38 distinct word types across the 15 essays, so a reasonable difference there. I've got some online materials which I've developed in relation to this study, and they're available freely on my Google Drive, and please do download them. There's a number of activities there. Another thing I thought about doing was using the COPA corpus, the links online there, which allows you to look at more discipline-specific sub-corpora. You could, for example, go onto the corpus here and search for this plus noun structures in corpus of medical English or legal English, and then see whether how different or not they are to the word that's presented here. And students can obviously compare them and see the kinds of nouns that are used for lexical cohesion, and just add them to the list or form their own lists. Not too difficult to do that in class. Here's an example of the kind of activity we've been doing in class, giving the first line of an argument, or something that could become an argument, and giving them this and asking them to search the list for abstract nouns that can be used here, and then approaching the citation with a critical stance. Franklin states the idea that this word list relates to a measurable linguistic reality in the language at large is unfortunately a fiction. And then we've got this, well, this what? Can we look back at the list and see what can go in there? And we've had quite a lot of fun in class doing that kind of thing, and students seem to enjoy it. And there's a number of other activities in the materials available online. So, in summary, some nouns are used much more frequently than others in cohesive nominal groups. The exact figures are in the paper, but words like this and this time, this case, this point, I mean, they're massively frequent. Investigating a corpus of humanities and social sciences text has allowed the production of a list of key terms, which I hope that you might find useful. The point is to use them pedagogic purposes. And there's some evidence from an EAP program that lower levels use determiner, noun cohesion, less than higher levels. And these higher levels are, in terms of frequency, similar to native speakers, but less adjectives, and the nouns are sort of less specialist or less academic. Some of the references I've used here, feel free to email me if you've got any questions. It was my first piece of research in this area, so I'd possibly be aware of some of the things you might say to me, but it'd be great to hear them anyway. So yeah, thank you very much.